It is time for another edition of the Coaching Hour, and a very warm welcome. A warm welcome being the focus, I think, of my introduction, because if you are in Johannesburg or in fact in Gauteng, you will have noticed the seasons, they are a-changing. I think summer has very quickly made way for autumn, and I fear that autumn is very quickly going to become winter. So it is indeed a warm welcome from myself, Paul Rotherham. Lovely to have you here as we bring you another edition of what we hope is going to be an interesting and insightful series. Yes, and I say series because today's guest is going to be joining us, in fact, for the next 2 episodes. So a total of 3 episodes with our guest, who is an old friend of the show. And I use the term old loosely, so no offense taken, Jared. My name
No
is
worry,
Paul
I'm old.
Rotherham. Thank you, sir. I'm joined by Mary and Maryke, of course, and Maryke always has the honors of introducing our guest, even though the face you can see on your screen now is familiar, or perhaps might be familiar, because we did last chat with Jared many months ago, Maryke.
We did, absolutely. Thank you, Paul. Yes, we are welcoming Jared Shippel again today. And he's a leadership coach and organizational strategist um, who helps companies build psychological safety in high-performing teams. He focuses on simple but yet a powerful idea. When people feel safe to challenge ideas, admit mistakes, and speak honestly, organizations perform better. And that is a great introduction for the first part of our series. Welcome, Jared. Nice to have you.
Thanks so much. It's great to be back with you guys.
Yes, great. So today's topic, psychological safety has actually become a buzzword, in organizations, I would say the last 2 years especially. So today we want to talk about the business case of psychological safety. So Jared, what happened in your journey as a coach and facilitator that brought you to focus on this specific topic?
Um, Great question. So there were really a couple of different things. I've run businesses over the years where some people were just thriving and other
Mm,
people were not. And what I realized was that some of those people were being treated differently, or they had a different personality.
mm,
I thought being nice to everyone all the time was the answer. It isn't. It's about allowing people to feel heard, to be able to voice their opinions and know that they are not going to be chastised or shut down, and knowing that they actually are contributors to that organization. I was also on the other end of the scale, working within a team, several directors. It became an environment where some voices were louder than others. Um, and and what I realized is that the more I was keeping quiet, the more I was feeling that this was a toxic environment. It wasn't for me. So I really started focusing a lot more on that in my coaching and consulting practice, and found that it's incredibly prevalent, and got into some of the work from Amy Edmondson, who really is the doyen, the person who coined the term psychological safety.
yes. Okay. So can you tell us exactly what is psychological safety and why businesses are talking about it these days?
So there's been a number of reasons. Excuse me. Businesses have started finding that people are burning out. They're incredibly stressed. No matter what they throw at the problem, it still is a problem and it's growing. One organization that I've dealt with, they have 5 burnouts a month, and it's a business of 700. So really scary. So psychological safety is the ability for a person to feel that the environment is one where they can speak up, one where they're allowed to make mistakes. It's not about being nice, but having an adult conversation as opposed to a parent-child conversation, to pull from transactional analysis. um, they can feel it's an organization where people need to feel that they can question the status quo without repercussions, and that it will be treated as such.
Yes.
No punishment, no persecution within the business, etc. But they do have to have that voice.
Mm.
Okay, if you don't, that weighs on you the most, and that's where psychological safety comes in, because we tend to play in our own minds and say, well, it's better for me to keep quiet because I'm going to have X, Y, and Z happen to me.
Historically, Jared, is
Mhm.
that something that has generally happened within businesses where you have a hierarchical structure? Those at the top get to talk, those at the bottom are like children, seen but not heard. Has it historically been like that? Because I think I come from an industry where typically that isn't my experience. I was in corporate for a couple of years and absolutely hated it. And I guess to some
Yeah.
extent it was like that. But is this kind of the majority? Is this how most businesses are run?
So fortunately, a lot of businesses are changing. If we go back several generations to at least my parents' generations, probably everyone who has parents' generation, yeah, it was run almost, businesses were run almost like the army, and it was shape up
Yeah.
or ship out. Okay. That is changing with flatter structures, but what people are still not realizing is that even with a flat structure, um, it's not the only answer to be nice. People actually need to have constructive criticism as well. So I think you're right, Paul. I think you're right in the sense that there is more of an open door policy now with many businesses, but they're still getting it wrong, and that's being shown by something called by Gallup. They have something called the National Global State of the Global Workforce, and for the last 3 years, I've just been consolidating that. Um, we're finding that it's getting worse. People are feeling lonelier, angrier, not just more stressed at work. And it's causing people to want to leave, which is one of the biggest costs to businesses. Yeah.
So, Jared, what you're speaking about is ideal to get the psychological environment to be in harmony, right? But
Yes.
that is that I'm in observation. I do observe this, and what I found is that the people on the ground are scared. There's no, they don't feel a liberty to speak because they're scared they're going to be victimized. They're scared they're going to be shipped out, because that happens. In organizations, they work you out. If they don't like you, then they will make every effort to have discussions with you until it becomes a warning, second, third, and then you're out. And you said people are allowed to make mistakes. So I mean, well, we should be allowed to make mistakes.
Should be,
But
yes.
but they're using those mistakes against the people on the ground. So how do you get past that? You know,
So
yeah,
it's
carry
a
on.
it's a it's a great question you're asking. And the onus really lies in the leadership. So um, when I write a lot and talk a lot about leadership, I differentiate between leaders and leadership. Leadership is someone who holds a C-suite title, director, MD. It doesn't necessarily mean that person is a true leader from a psychological safety perspective. Um, they become like that field marshal in the army again, because a mistake in the army will cost you lives. A mistake in the modern day business should be, as long as it's not too detrimental, should allow you to be able to learn from that and increase the profitability, the productivity within the business. So it needs to be an environment where there's a meeting of two entities. I'm not going to just say people, so that they have a relationship, and you're not just an employee number or someone who works in that department that is just, it's not so important. You're just marketing. Okay. Sales is more important than you guys. Finance is more important. Ops is more important. And the moment we start seeing the entire business, the entire organization, like the body, every part is important, and then allowing that feedback, and being curious enough and humble enough to accept that, that's when the benefits of it start showing themselves, rather than just treating it like a machine. So typically businesses have run with very technical policies and procedures, and standards. The entire system is run like on the old industrial revolution. Okay. Once people are seen, what we're finding now is that productivity increases. You have a reduced amount of turnover of staff. People don't want to leave. Okay, the right people want to stay. The wrong people, they leave. And that's another thing that we can also talk about is, who stays and who goes.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it is good that people leave, as long as they're not the wrong people.
How do you know? How do you know who's wrong and who's right? Because as
Right.
coach, everybody's right.
Let me paint a scenario for you. Oh, excuse me. You have a department, let's say a finance or an HR department, and generally people gel as a team. They fit in with that culture. The one that the director or the manager of that division really is trying to inculcate. But there's that one person who doesn't just complain or cause problems because it's going to grow the business, but it's for other reasons and it's for the sake of it. So that's on the one side. If it's the manager who's now being prejudicial or argumentative with a particular person, that starts breaking down that team. And businesses are made up of teams. It's a case of everyone building up almost to an emotional intelligence level where they understand, if I'm criticized constructively, I can take that and I can perform better. But at the same time, that the head, okay, the brain behind it, the person who's in charge, needs to have an understanding of how to do that. And polarizing it, so becoming too harsh or becoming too soft with people is the challenge. People want to be treated like adults, not like children.
Jared, you mentioned earlier that it's not about being nice. Is it there still a misunderstanding of leaders and executives thinking that psychological safety means I need to be nicer, I need to be a nicer
Absolutely.
person?
Absolutely. It's, if you take a look at businesses that have really succeeded, and businesses that unfortunately have failed, some of those are amazing places to work in. But I try and break it up into a 2x2 matrix. We have to look at how procedural a business is, but we also look at how sociable the environment is and how much people actually care. Now, to produce a really a really good quality service, you need to find the balance between being nice and making sure that you meet deadlines, targets, etc. So we call that a quality service. The absolute opposite of that is where it's not procedural, it's not nice, people don't like each other. That I call a fridge. Okay, so it's cold. It's a place where everything stagnates, life doesn't exist. If we become too friendly and that makes way for um, getting the job, getting the job done, we end up with a friendly zoo. Okay. And the other alternative is if we are too procedural and we forget about the human element, that people may want to go and watch their child play a game of sport. Okay. They might have something urgent to do that, is personal, but is not going to be on an ongoing basis. Then it becomes almost like a production line, like a factory. So what we ultimately want to do is temper the niceness. It's not Mary Poppins, but at this, one of the most successful leaders, and Jim Collins talks about a concept that came out from Harvard called humility with resolve. And he spoke about different leaders, and Harvard actually went into it. Who are those leaders? And one of those was the former CEO of General Electric in the US, Jack Welch. Jack Welch was harsh. Okay, he demanded people to meet the requirements of the business. So a little anecdote with him: he came into the business; they were doing terribly. First meeting, he said, anyone is late for a meeting, you're immediately fired. The very next meeting, 5 or 10 minutes late, the HR director walked in, apologized, he said, you're out. But at the same time, if you showed commitment to the business, he had all the time in the world. And he's the father of Six Sigma. He built it into the second biggest business in the world. So the business success shouldn't play second fiddle to people being treated nicely and feeling that, the world is all cotton wool. Okay. I have this discussion with a lot of people, but in my day, when I played sport, there was no participation award for coming last. Okay. At the same time, if you did do well, you were supported. Your coach would then say, well, this is where we can do better. And that's exactly what we need. We can't swing to the poles, if that makes any sense to you. And that has a huge financial implication on the business. If I'm too nice, clients are ultimately going to be unhappy because that deadline can be met in 2 weeks' time, but the client needs it now. But at the same time, if I'm pushing too hard and I want to beat every deadline, people are going to start dropping like flies and they're going to be hospitalized, as has been the case.
I think niceness, if we can call it that, Jared, is also relative, because what might appear nice to me might not be nice to someone else. And that's where I do feel for these business owners, because you have to draw a line in the sand at some point. And for someone who is used to not having any lines at all, that can appear draconian. But for someone who is very used to having lines and borders and parameters, and a lot of people actually function better with those, then it's okay. Then the powers that be are still being nice. But it does bring me to my next question, and that is this. I think at the beginning of any journey in a corporate, let's refer to it as corporate, because I think it is larger businesses that generally are implementing what we're chatting about today. It's not the small moms and pops brands or stores. But in a larger business, you get a new job, you're all excited, it's your dream job, it's got a great salary, there's lots of perks. You start, you go to work, and for the first few weeks or month or so, it's novelty, as it always is. You getting to know everyone, and everyone, even if there are rules in place, everyone's generally a little more forgiving, and you're allowed a little bit of extra time to get things done. You're learning the ropes. But very quickly, in some cases, you can start realizing that, hang on, wait a minute, the gutters are leaking, the paint's coming off the wall, the desk's got a wonky leg, the carpet's dirty, there's no coffee, and suddenly it's like when you buy or look at your dream house, you start realizing, whoa, hang on, there's a million things wrong here. So it leads me to the question, are there signs at the beginning that can lead you to see nice and early that a workplace is lacking in psychological safety?
Absolutely. Okay, and sometimes they're quite insidious. They're things that you wouldn't normally notice because of the way we've kind of been conditioned. So one of those is if you're sitting in a meeting where, let's say, there's a clear hierarchy, and the only person or the only people who's talking is that person who's chairing the meeting. So silence in meetings is one of the absolute critical issues, signs that psychological safety is not there because people don't feel that they can speak up. They don't feel that they can have a say without some kind of punitive action. People try and hide their mistakes. If there's a case where accountability is not taken, blaming someone else just so that you don't get punished. And leadership also needs to be challenged because these are not all wise, all knowing individuals. No one can possibly be. If there's a lack of challenge or a lack of suggestions within an organization, usually that is a sign that something is just not right. Someone is lacking that emotional intelligence. And then the last one, and I'm going to use a positive example of exactly where there was amazing leadership. So if innovation stops within a business, that's a crucial sign. So if we go back to the days when Michael Jordan was the CEO at FNB, it was the most innovative business in South Africa by far. Under his tenure, there was something like 2,500 new innovations in a matter of 3 to 4 years. Incredible stuff. And people to this day talk about the fact that he left. Okay, he retired. He had done what he needed to do. He is still the face of the FNB at its absolute prime. Now, that's probably for me one of the most critical indicators that if I wanted to walk into a business today, I want a business that's vibey, that's innovative, where people can people's voices can be heard in a meeting. Those are probably the most critical ones that I'm seeing. There is one more, and that is how passive are people within a business. The more passive they are, the more wary I am, and I start digging deeper then.
Now, Jared, you mentioned financial cost. How does financial cost come in with or lack of psychological safety?
Okay. I'm glad you asked that because what businesses have typically said is if I'm productive, then I'm going to be, if I heighten my productivity, then I'm going to be able to earn more as a business. We become more profitable, yada, yada. Great. That works with the very technical systems. What's happened is that human systems haven't necessarily been taken into account because they're hard to quantify. How do I quantify that someone is feeling lonely in their job if they won't tell me? How do I quantify that someone is not putting in the amount of work that he or she could because they had a fight with their manager? So what I did for one client is I took a look at just 2 metrics. So I'll give you an idea. I'd like to give it in the form of a case study. So this is a business of about 130 to 140 people, turning over probably a few hundred million, quite a successful business. Excuse me. They've never had a high staff turnover. Now, the replacement cost of someone today is incredibly high. If someone leaves, you're probably looking at anywhere from 25 to 40% of that person's salary having being a replacement cost before they just to get them started. Then you want them to get to the position that this other person was. So the scary figures are by the time that if a person were to leave after say 6 months, that can cost your business anything from 4 to, and this is going to sound dramatic, but if that's an executive, as much as 27 times their salary in loss. Okay, huge. The average person is probably 2 to 4 times. That's just on turnover. But from a positive perspective, if I, in this particular case, took a look at what the average value of a person is to the organization, and it worked out to somewhere in the region of around 450,000 Rand per year per person. If I increase that person's productivity by treating them the way that they need to be, they feel respected, etc., just 3%, that's an extra, it worked out to just under 13,000 Rand per person on the bottom line. Now look at half that staff. I have an extra million Rand on my bottom line, okay, for 70 people. It's substantial. And that's only looking at 2 metrics. I'm not taking into account what happens if that person is boarded for in hospital, or they boarded off sick for high levels of stress, burnout, and then we start looking at the scariest of the lot. If that person's a silent quitter, okay, it's almost like they're on a go slow and their productivity decreases. So now instead of increasing that productivity to the tune of 13,000 Rand for per person, that person's productivity can drop anything 5, 10%, maybe even 20%. Suddenly we're looking at that person costing 100,000 Rand, 150,000 Rand per year to a business of that size. And that adds up. So we're talking about the scary thing is, according to Gallup, I think it's the 2025 report, it says that we have a 19% engagement rate. That's it. In sub-Saharan Africa, 19%. So 81% of people are underperforming. Let's say they're underperforming by 3%. Okay. And you have a staff of 100, 81 people multiplied by 13,000. If we just use the figures I've used, and that's your loss in productivity immediately. So, I'm sorry, it's getting a little bit mathematical, but this is not seen because I can't really quantify it as easily on my balance sheet as I can, my production rate or how much revenue I'm bringing in. You'll see it after the fact, and that's what's so worrying.
Oh, yeah, that is very scary and eye-opening. So what can a leader begin to do to adopt a more psychological safety, approach? Where can they start?
Okay, so I like to look at what they shouldn't do and then kind of do the opposite. So stop being so punishing, so punitive. Okay. Try to criticize less in public. If there is criticism, what works better, and I'm sure each of us has experienced it. I can talk from my own experience. If I've been criticized publicly, even if it's constructively, there's a level of embarrassment. Okay. Rather have that private one-to-one and watch the respect that you get from the person because you have taken them aside and shown them what needs to happen. Okay? It's okay for a leader to be wrong as well. So as a leader, it's got to be a case of how do I become less defensive when someone does challenge me or offers an alternative solution? Do I have that intellectual curiosity to say, well, let's at least look at this. Is there a better way? Or am I all powerful, all knowing, and what I say is the law? So we have to steer clear of leaders actually being that infallible individual. And
God
then,
complex.
sorry,
A God complex.
the God complex, exactly. And then there's one last thing, and for me, this is so critical I coach a lot on this. But instead of being loyal to a small segment and having your favorites, rather reward the truth, reward accountability. Okay, and reward is often forgotten as part of the business, and reward people at the level that they need it to be. So by that, one person may like to be rewarded with just a simple email. Someone needs to actually physically hear it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then there are the people who want flowers and a card. But not everyone wants that same approach. Okay. So getting to know and understand your people is absolutely critical, and be considerate rather than nice, if that makes sense.
Can you give us an example of a criticism that is constructive? That you can that you must rather say on a one-to-one and not in public.
Excuse me. Okay. So let's take this to probably one of the higher levels within an organization. Okay. If you have a team that generally respects their employees, but you have that one director or two directors that are more confrontational, their style is to drive people. What I would do as the CEO or even as their co-director is take that person aside. Don't do this in the forum of an exco meeting, or if you have other members of the board, or worse, in an AGM. Okay, take them aside and first point out their strengths. So for me, I follow something called the hamburger or the sandwich approach when it comes to feedback. Show them what their strengths are. Engage, is this person able to take the criticism that I'm actually going to be giving them? Once we have that, if they need a lot more hand holding, even if they're an exec, I'm going to have something that is very positive. Then the criticism, I would prefer it if you could handle your employees in a way that is a little bit kinder or more understanding, etc. And then follow up with more positive. So you start with positive, end with positive. If that person is what I call a bucket, they can take a lot of criticism and own it. So you give them the positive, give them the negative, a fair amount of it, end off with the positive, finished. If they're what I call a thimble, which is, I have a teacup and a thimble, turn that into a multi-layered dagwood. So have the positive, then have the negative, positive, then a bit more, and you incrementally help them through that process. The one other thing that I would always recommend that a leader employs is to refrain from using you language, because that comes across as very accusatory. If a person uses the terms like "I feel," "I need," then it comes across as a more adult conversation. It's a conversation about how this person perceives your behavior, rather than the fact that you are just a rotten egg. Okay.
Sure. There's a lot actually that one can unfold in this topic. I mean, like you said, it takes emotional intelligence of the leader that needs to be developed. It's not just,
Yes.
it's starting slow with changing a certain approach, like what you've just mentioned.
Mm.
But yeah, I think it's a great topic, and there's so many aspects, and that's why we are doing a series on this. Because next time we're going to talk about building resilience within teams. And as you said,
Yes.
in organizations, they work in teams. To take it from this concept and then applying it more specifically, to team safety and productivity and so on. So thank you. This is a very important discussion.
Thank you. One thing I do want to say though is, it's um, not a situation where you can just slap a bandage on and it's good. So putting everyone on emotional intelligence training will do a little bit, but it won't solve the issues. We're talking about a mindset issue when it comes to psychological safety. So from a practical business perspective, that's a place to start, but it's definitely not going to see your results unless you start actually creating those fora where people can understand each other properly, whether that is some form of mediation or coaching, um, or if you have internal people within the organization who can do that. If you're fortunate enough to have that, to run sessions and actually have that as a crucial element, just as much as you have productivity output, you factor that in. It may have a time cost, it may have an actual monetary cost, but in the long run, it prevents people from leaving the business. It keeps people healthier. It makes them more productive at the end of the day, and it comes back um, hugely, absolutely hugely.
To me, Jared, I think, and it's again not something we can go into or we have to go into detail with, but to me, you need to have the right people in the room for this to happen. If you have someone in the room who is closed to this, not open to being coached, not open to having their thoughts perhaps shifted in some way, you
Yes.
can be sadly in a draconian Hitler style environment where no amount of coaching, no amount of talking, communicating, discussions, mediation. Some people, sadly, I say that with respect, are where they are and nothing is going to change them. And I guess that's at that point, it's a bit like flogging a dead horse in a relationship. If you've tried, if you've had all the counseling, all the mediation, there does come a point where you go, okay, I need to get off this horse and get on a new one. We hope that that isn't the case for you if you're listening to this right now. But I do think it does require two willing, let's call them parties, employer, employee, namely.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you put it in that way as well, because if you going back to what I said a little bit earlier, I think it was with Mary, sometimes it's good to get people out of the organization, not in a terrible way, but certain people just don't fit with a culture. So when we talk about staff turnover or people leaving in an organization, often human resources departments are saying, we've got a really low turnover, that's amazing. Or it's terrible, we've got a high staff turnover. But what they're not looking at is who is actually leaving. So when I talk about my high level performers staying, let's say I've had 10 people who've left my organization in the past year. For a small business, that could be quite a lot. If 40 to 60% or more are people who are my high performers, I want to know why. Something is not going right in my organization. But if those are people who kind of, you know, slid along, other people were covering for them, they caused unnecessary friction in the business, upset clients, and things like that. If they are the higher percentage, then I'm less worried about those 10 people leaving the business, because I can get someone in who is going to fulfill that role and make it a more productive role as opposed to a destructive role.
Yeah. The problem, inverted commas, doesn't always have to lie with the employee. It might sadly be with the employer, or with somebody who's high up the tree. And I think that's something, just to wrap up today's episode, I think that's something that brings our conversation full circle, is to understand that just because you are at the top of the tree and you have a fancy title, or you are a director, doesn't mean that you are infallible and perfect and never make mistakes. And one would like to think in this day and age that you only get to the point of being someone influential when you've learned that. But sadly, as I'm sure you've experienced, that's not the case. There are, unfortunately, many people who are in leadership roles who, quite frankly, aren't capable of fulfilling those roles. And that's a reality of life. It's also, dare I say, with respect, a reality of some of the laws, particularly in South Africa, where there are fast-tracked appointments and people who are given positions that very often aren't just difficult for the company, but they're difficult and disrespectful for them. They shouldn't be in them, period. But they are, because it ticks a box somewhere on a piece of paper. And I guess the secret is to, how do we navigate that? And hopefully through your series, we will gain some skills in doing just that. And I'd like to hope that this series is watched not only by people who have a job and are perhaps looking to improve how they react in that workplace, but also decision makers, directors, employers, heads of companies who can also learn from this. Because I think if you think you're at the point where you can't learn anything more, then that's already a big problem.
I think that's one of the red flags you were talking about, Paul. We were talking about. But I think there's just one more thing I'd like to say, and that is that psychological safety is not created by policy. It's created by leadership behavior. And that's where the rubber hits the road. We can have the most amazing policies. We could have brilliant standard operating procedures. If we're not taking into account the people who have to fulfill those policies, fulfill those procedures, that's where psychological safety starts to wane.
We're looking forward to hearing more from you in our forthcoming episodes. Still 2 more to come. If you'd like to comment on this, please do. In the comments section, we would love to hear from you. Any questions you'd like to put to Jared, I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them. Jared Shippel, thank you for joining us. And we will definitely look forward to speaking with you again next week and the week thereafter. Thanks so much to you as well for watching the Coaching Hour today. Maryke, thank you for your insight and questions. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.